Yes. Okay, guys. So we've talked about a couple topics, but let's get to the real meat and potatoes of today's show, which is, should Paramount sell Star Trek? Now, I want to lead this off by talking a little bit about the big Disney news that has been going on there. And if anyone out there watches Dubdy Dub's channel, WDW Pro, he has been covering this like white on rice. Like, he is just on top of this stuff. It is very detailed. He has a great channel. Go check him out. But basically, the long and short of this is that Disney, in an effort to figure out how to actually stem the bleeding of their financials, is going to be selling off some of their TV properties. So it looks like ABC's on the block, FX, certain parts of ESPN, et cetera, et cetera. And basically, there's a big rumor going out around there that that Disney as a whole might actually be sold to Apple. And in addition to that, like, that just kind of sets the stage, because Disney, like, is such a big company. I think Apple is worth like trillions of dollars as opposed to billions. So like, if they were to absorb them, they would get, their whole library, they would get their parks, they would get all that stuff. And but I don't know if that's actually the case. That's just a rumor. But what is not a rumor is that they are going to be selling off certain TV divisions. And that brings us over to Paramount and their parent company, which I believe is, I'm blanking on it right now, but Paramount Global, used to be Viacom. Basically, they're so strapped for cash that they are slashing their dividend. They're putting their publishing house up for sale, Simon & Schuster. And they're also firing a bunch of people as a more disciplined approach to, their spending. And a lot of people are asking, like, what impact does this have with Star Trek? And already we've seen a couple of Star Trek shows get canceled. The last season of Picard, basically they had been on record as saying, oh, we'll keep doing season of Picard as long as Patrick Stewart wants to do it. But they capped it off at 3 because it's a $100 million TV show per season. And then you had the Star Trek Prodigy also kind of like go the way of the dodo. So the question here is that at what point would it make sense for Paramount to actually sell off the Star Trek franchise and basically cash out on it one last time in order to kind of like take this austerity measure? Robert, I'd like to throw this to you to begin with. What's your take on it?
Well, I mean, look, I think that, like so many other things, the entertainment business is going through a massive sea change that I think YouTube, TikTok, so much of the way people, especially younger audiences, are getting entertained has completely changed. I've often said that movies, and to a certain extent television, were the art form of the 20th century. That has changed in the 21st century. Movies do not have the resonance. When I was a little kid, I was movie mad. We didn't have photorealistic video games. We had movies. Now things have completely changed. Mm-hmm. And young people will go to movies. I mean, I've watched 2 teenage girls grow up. They care less about films. They'll go to them and like them, but they have no resonance. There's other things they would rather do. And I would assume the same is probably true of teenage boys. I mean, they'll go see a Marvel movie, but they'd much rather be playing Ghost of Tsushima or being online doing something else. So that was something that no one anticipated. Everybody is holding on to these old business models. Now, when it comes to Star Trek, the thing about Star Trek is only as good as does it reflect the culture that the audience is living through. In the 1960s, we're arguably in one of the most tumultuous periods of modern American history. We were not in the middle of World War II, but you had civil rights, you had Vietnam, you had the assassination of John F. Kennedy, of Martin Luther King, of Bobby Kennedy. The kids were being drafted, and the country was tearing itself apart. And you had a show like Star Trek that was incredibly optimistic and incredibly smart. A show that was saying that there is a future, we will solve our problems, and humanity will be enlightened as we move out amongst the stars. And we will take what we've learned here on Earth with us to help the rest of the universe get better. That's what Star Trek was about. It was aspirational, and it was about where we could aspire to one day be. problem with modern Star Trek is it is trying to be a reflection of where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a mistake, because there's this weird impulse in all of entertainment. Everybody wants to see themselves reflected in the entertainment they watch. This is completely not what Star Trek is all about. Star Trek is not here to reaffirm you today. Star Trek is here to offer you a vision of what we could all maybe be. Something we will eventually evolve into. People that we aspire to, that we'd love to become. When I was a kid, I didn't expect to see myself in Star Trek. I looked at Kirk, Spock, and McCoy as people that I would hope to one day grow into. Nowadays, all entertainment everybody wants to see themselves reflected back. And because that's where we're at. Social media has turned everybody into, we're all narcissistic, navel-gazing people that we can program our input to only be stuff that we want, which is really weird, because it used to be that you had to look outward and see things that you didn't know that you wanted. That's what we discovered through entertainment. That's what we discovered through literature. Like, my God, here is a different, better way to live. Now all anybody wants is to have their own ways of living reaffirmed.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to aspire to things. You're okay the way you are. You're okay. No, you're not. No, you're not. Our civilization is crumbling because we have lost the aspirational impulse to do better. And doing better is hard. It's hard work. It requires dedication, years sometimes. And that's what Star Trek used to be about. Now you watch Star Trek and it sounds like I'm at the bridge is my local Starbucks. People talk to each other the way you hear. I mean, it's so gross. It's so gross the way the bridge crew of the Enterprise under Pike is written. I'm like, who are these people? Why are they talking? Why are they making the smartest man on the ship the butt of jokes?
Or Rob, to that point, forgive my interruption.
Yeah, please.
So this is now an iconic line of dialogue from the character of Spock, and we can all think of great Spock lines down the years, but I'm just going to add this one in here from last week's adventure. Smoky and salty and sweet and soft and crispy all at the same time. I must have more.
I think we can all aspire to eat bacon. That is our future as
Spock from Star Trek. I mean, I actually, Rob, you hit the nail on the head there. But there's so much to diagnose the fundamental problem with Star Trek since as far back as 2009, and it's only gotten worse since Discovery came on the scene. But I think, if anything, you could distill down the very issue with modern Star Trek, with the treatment, focusing on the treatment of the character of Spock alone, and the total misunderstanding of that character, I think is very illustrative.
If I could just throw out one of the great Spock lines ever is also in one of the most iconic Spock episodes of all time, the first episode of the second season of the original series, Amok Time. I won't go into the plot, but at the end, after everything that happens, Spock says, "After a time, you may find that having is not so pleasing a thing, after all, as wanting. It is not logical, but it is often true." One of the great lines of Spock. I would love, since 2009, to hear a writer on Star Trek come up with a line as great as that, but no one ever has.
Here it is. That's the line right there.
Yeah,
it's fantastic writing right there. It's amazing.
But I mean, that's the thing that bothers me, and so often, and I think it really comes down to the fact that, I hate to say it, but the American education system, people don't know classic literature. The people that wrote the original Star Trek were actually writers themselves. They were novelists, short story writers, playwrights. They wrote science fiction. They fought in World War II. Gene Roddenberry was not only an accomplished pilot in World War II, but then he was a speechwriter for the chief of police of Los Angeles. He walked the beat. We don't have that anymore.
Yeah. Also, we don't seem to have correct filmmaking techniques. There's an extreme lack of establishing shots. There's there's an erroneous amount of scenes that are completely unnecessary. I mean, there's so many scenes that don't drive the story. Go ahead.
I will say, Brian, that to Rob's point, We did have a Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist take care of the first season of Star Trek Picard. So even novelists nowadays are not, all that they're cracked up.
And by the way, one of my favorite writers. He's an incredible writer, but even that is that I think that people forget he wanted to make Star Trek the way he wanted it, and everyone wants to change. To Dave's point too, we have all these writers that want to change these classic mythic structures and make them more that people are saying, nah, you know what? We're not going to do that. Let's postmodern deconstruct our characters anymore, as if heroes somehow are a bad thing. That these aspirational characters are somehow, let's get rid of them. And why? What are you replacing them with? People that are mediocre? And I think maybe it comes down to the fact that we've never lived through hardship. It seems to me like all of the work that we're getting now is written by people from a culture. It is luxury to have the kinds of freedoms and to live in a culture where you don't go for want. We're too complacent, and we just assume that you can just call up Amazon and have everything delivered to you the next day. Well, what's it like when you don't live in that kind of a culture? We're all products of this luxury culture we live in. And unless you don't live in that, can you write real heroes anymore? Does anyone know how to do that?
Yeah, they need to take a Robert McKee seminar once in a while. Let me throw this to Dave Cullen, because Dave has been doing some excellent coverage on Star Trek as well. Dave, what are the problems with modern Star Trek, and do you think Paramount could put it on the chopping block?
Well, they could. That anything's possible. They could they sell it? Will they? Who knows? I mean, they've held on to it for a very, very long time. But I think we all recognize the fact that Paramount has, and it's actually. I mean, my complaints with Star Trek go back a very long time, to even the late 90s, early 2000s, where I wasn't fully happy with the direction that Voyager had gone in, even the early seasons of Enterprise. I mean, looking back, you go, oh, that was actually great. What was I even complaining about by comparison to where we are now? But, having said that, I always thought something like Voyager was sort of stuck in third gear. It had potential beyond where they were willing to take it, I suppose. But I definitely think, with the cancellation of Enterprise in 2005, it was pretty clear the Paramount did not, and really hasn't fully understood, at least their top brass, I guess, what they have with Star Trek. I mean, if anything, I think they tried, with few exceptions, unsuccessfully, to build a movie spin-off franchise out of Star Trek that seldom worked well. I mean, some of the first 6 films, I think we can all think, 2, 3, 4, 6, one is still my favorite Star Trek film of all of them. I've come to appreciate it more over the years, but it wasn't a massive commercial success at the time. I don't think they ever really understood how to make that work. And I think they thought they just had to sort of be Star Wars. And I think that's why they when they decided to change things and bring in Bad Robot, they said, okay, look, let's just turn this into an action franchise. And it was just, everything about that decision shows how little they really appreciate Gene Roddenberry's vision, or the fact that Star Trek was supposed to be sort of niche. It was never supposed to be mainstream.
Yeah.
When that 2009 film came out, I suddenly heard people speaking favorably of Star Trek that would always look down at it or laugh at it or be a little bit smug about it, or think it was this weird sort of, fringe geeky kind of sci-fi. And I was happy for it to live in that place, because I felt like people like myself had a sort of ownership of it, and then over time, it just, once you make something for a general audience, you naturally have to sort of bring it down to the lowest common denominator. And so the films, there becomes very little difference in terms of action, tone, pacing, dialogue, characterization, theme, and everything else. It was very different. There's no difference between that and a Mission Impossible film, or Fast and Furious film, or a Transformers film, or whatever it is. Suddenly Star Trek was operating in that sort of space. And since then, I think when they brought it back for television, elements of that transformation remained in place. And so 2017, the woke thing was really, I think, maybe into its second year at that point. And it became fairly obvious that whatever about those first 3 J.J. Abrams films, and I can't say anything terribly positive about them. What they weren't, with the exception of Into Darkness, perhaps, was terribly depressing or dystopian. There's certainly elements about that film I really disliked. But I think that to Rob's point, when you have people, I mean, it's that meme. I always get this mixed up, but good times create weak men create bad times create strong men, and strong men create good times.
Yeah.
So it's that cycle. And I think it is a case of you've got a generation of young people who've had the internet, they've had modernity, they've had comfort, they've had materialism, they've had decadence. Their entire world is couched in that. You look back in the 1960s. I've been in a lot of reviews of sci-fi movies from the 1970s,
and they're great, by the way. Your review series is terrific.
I appreciate that. But one of the themes really that's consistent in those 70s movies, which was really the birthplace of the environmental movement, is that there's this complete sea change between the beginning of the 1970s and the end of the 1960s. The Vietnam War and the demoralization of America that followed, and the fact that the kind of hippie movement of love and peace and everything that wasn't enough to create the kind of utopia. It wasn't enough to end the war. And at the end of that, what resulted was a real sense of fear of the future. And Star Trek was one of the few franchises, one of the few consistent science fiction icons that maintained a hopeful and optimistic vision throughout all of those years and all of those decades that followed. And it's funny because there's so much sci-fi today is disturbingly dystopian. And I think it's born out of the fact that when a generation or a couple of generations have not endured significant hardship for long, where do you go? You can't get anything much better other than to deconstruct what's already great about the civilization you're living in. And so all that's happening now is we have this beautiful house, and it's like, the house could be better. So you don't appreciate what you have. You don't appreciate the people who sacrificed to build that house. Right. No. What happens if we just tear the walls down? What happens if we take the roof off? What happens? Well, we won't have a house anymore. And that is the state of the Western world right now. And that indeed is the state of all of the cultural touchstones and institutions, be they political or in terms of science fiction, for example, Star Trek, Star Wars, you name it, Indiana Jones. That's what's happening to all of these things. It's a civilizational decline. It's what my friend John Waters describes as everything is in free fall. And I just see that as illustrative of where Star Trek is right now. It's been going for over 50 years, much like Doctor Who. What are we seeing? The exact same maladies that have befallen all of these shows.
But if I could speak just real quickly, Dave, I couldn't agree with you more. I think another problem with our civilization is over the last, say, 50 years, there's been so much emphasis on people's, say, mental health, and like everybody, life is hard. Being alive is terrifying, and it is messy, it is difficult, it is painful, and we have this society where everybody wants to make everybody feel better all the time. Let's have therapy, let's have mental health. And yes, that is a great thing, but people have to understand that's a luxury item. And nowadays, when you're a hero putting up with, if you're in war or you're out on the final frontier, you don't necessarily have a lot of time to worry about your mental health. You have to step up and make something happen. And I think nowadays people are fearful, or it's like, no, man, you have to take time for yourself. Well, the kinds of changes that happen galactically or happen socially happen quickly and in fits and starts, and they're loud and they're messy and they're explosive. And those are the people in those times that step up to the plate and solve the problems that we need to have solved. Nowadays, I think our culture is so focused on, I need to feel better about myself. Well, when a boulder is rolling down the hill at you, that boulder doesn't care how you feel about yourself. You have to get the hell out of the way or do something about it. And your mental health can come later. And our heroes, the men especially, are being deconstructed because it's like, oh, I feel bad, so I can't function anymore. Let me go to Achito and throw my lightsaber over the back of my shoulder and not worry about it because I can't deal. It's just too hard. This is what we have been reduced to. Well, I got news for you. That attitude is going to lead us right off a cliff.
I think that's actually. Sorry, go ahead.
No, let's ask Robert if he thinks there's going to be an episode with Spock going into a safe space pretty soon. So
I wouldn't be surprised. There are I'll tell you something. There are no safe spaces in the cosmos anywhere.
I mean, Pike has his safe space. It's his kitchen that he doesn't get out of ever through the entire series run. It's, so.
Well, if he didn't get out of the kitchen, how would Spock eat bacon?
I know.
Real quick, we got a new member, 1864 Kev. Welcome to the membership. Really appreciate that. So I want to throw this to Brian. Brian, one of the things that I remember is that back in the 90s when Viacom acquired CBS and therefore acquired the rights to Star Trek and Paramount and stuff like that, there was a concerted effort to crack down on the fan community. Basically, you couldn't write fan fiction anymore. You couldn't do any of the stuff that kept Star Trek alive during the lean years where there were like no movies or TV shows or like whatever. And fans have basically been fighting against Viacom and Paramount and all these draconian legal things, specifically with like fan films and stuff like that, where you have the owners of the IP basically trying to destroy the fan base that's supporting the IP. So in my mind, I think that maybe Star Trek finding a new home at a different studio might actually be healthy for it. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's never going to happen though. There was like a lot of rights issues between the TV shows and the movies. That's why the movies were like so much different. Or at least that's the working theory. There's always been like, very interesting things about Star Trek. The fans are very passionate about Star Trek. We love Star Trek. And when there's no Star Trek, fans are usually technical enough just to make their own. And, of course, Viacom didn't like that. Actually, they didn't have a problem with it until Axanar came around. Axanar really, that caused a lot of trouble. In fact, I think he sort of ruined it for everyone else, to be honest. Because he crowdfunded a ton of money and didn't actually do anything with it, which made Star Trek look bad. In fact,
we did make Prelude.
Yeah, I'll give this to Robert. Robert knows way more about this. He actually worked on this project.
Well, no, I mean, what was interesting about the Axanar project was you had a lot of impassioned fans that got together, and I worked on this project. So they crowdfunded $100,000 to make a short film called Prelude to Axanar. And it was made. The money was crowdfunded in March. We shot the Prelude in May. I was the editor, post supervisor, given a lot of leeway to take what was shot to turn it into something. And we debuted it at San Diego Comic-Con in 2014 in July. Worked beautifully well. It was fantastic. Everybody who worked on it. Christian Gossett, the director, an old friend of mine who'd done things like the comic book The Red Star, worked for Lucas doing Star Wars comics. It was like a dream. And then we used Axanar to leverage money. Axanar was proof of concept to make a feature film. What happened, like so many other Hollywood stories, is the person whose idea it was, Alec Peters, who had never made a movie before, he decided to get rid of everybody that actually made Prelude. He kept me around, but decided to get rid of everyone. And he was making a ton of money crowdfunding and decided to live off of it. Mm-hmm. The money should have gone right into an escrow account. We should have made Prelude. We should have made the Axanar feature film the way we made Prelude to Axanar. The one difference is that Alec Peters, who was taking in all the money, decided to live off of it. We were trying to build a studio at the same time, but he was not qualified to run a film project. And and to this day, CBS sued us. To this day, he still hasn't been able to finish 2 15-minute short films. And we made the 22-minute Prelude to Axanar soup to nuts from March to July. We crowdfunded in March. The film debuted in July of 2014. March, April, May, June, July. Crowdfunded, finished the movie, delivered it in a theater at the San Diego Comic-Con. And since then, Alec Peters hasn't been able to make 2 15-minute shorts.
Yeah, I know Alec personally too. Yeah, and it's crazy. And originally, I thought, oh, this guy is really trying to make something really fresh and new. But when every single update, every single tweet or whatever, every single community post is like, hey, now we're out in LA shooting, we're over here shooting now, and then there's gonna be a delay, but then we'll come back and shoot. Like, I don't know how long you need to shoot this thing. Like, for the love of God, it's supposed to be like you're creating 30 minutes of content, or less, I guess less, because the CBS thing, and it's just constantly, oh, I have a family emergency I have to go to. This actor has an emergency. There's always an emergency. Someone's sick, and it just seems like he's constant. To me, it seems like he is dragging his waning fan base along as they continue to support him with money.
Oh, it's just an absolute embarrassment.
Well,
Right.
if I may, on the fan film guidelines thing, because I was really disgusted when they came in. If you read some of them, I don't know, are these still being enforced? I'm not sure. But there's stuff in there, or at least there was at the time when they were written, about how you're not allowed to have any of the actors from any of the original shows in it, which I think is incredibly authoritarian. Like, how could you enforce whether, so this is a private production that's been created between people. You have this private agreement between a person who wants to act in your production. How you're going to keep these people from doing what they want to do? I understand they're not supposed to make any money out of it, although I have very different views on this, in the sense that I believe that all of these franchises should be in the public domain at this point. In fact, Star Trek would have been in the public domain a couple of years ago if it wasn't for the fact that, let's not forget that Washington is pay for play, and studios like lots of the ones that we're talking about have consistently lobbied to have copyright laws changed so that they can keep this intellectual property going and continue to milk off of it. But the reality is, if Star Trek was in the public domain, we wouldn't be here talking about it, because there would be no longer any sense of what canon is going forward. But that's true. But there would be industries all over the world. People would be making dozens of Star Trek productions for profit, and lots of people would find themselves gainfully employed.
Right.
Is this not a good thing? But so this is the thing. It's like, I want what's best for Star Trek. And to the original question there about whether Paramount should sell it or not, I just couldn't care about any of these studios anymore, because they didn't create it and they shouldn't have a right to it any longer.
Dave, can I put a period on that trademark thing real quick? The trademark laws are so skewed toward these giant, corporations. It's crazy. You have Mickey Mouse, who will be owned by Disney every single time his trademark is up and he's supposed to be entering the public domain. Literally every single time a law is changed. Somehow they get someone in the government to change laws that allow them to extend a right, or add some sentence somewhere that allows them to continue ownership of this character. Disney is the problem. When it comes to trademark, Disney has ruined the act of derivative art. Look, guys, all art is based on something. You are inspired by someone or something, even if it's a mountain range, or whatever. So it's okay to see something and be inspired by it and create something that you love based on that. But we are in a society now where the idea of public domain, something that was working for a long time, is no longer happening. Companies can own a character for longer than the person who created that character can be alive. Longer than a human can live. And a company can own that character almost in perpetuity. And the way they do it, and the way they've been lobbying the government to continually downplay new emerging artists and almost become gatekeepers in this world of entertainment and art. And Robert's right. TV is, at least for me, TV was always an art form. I love TV so much. And we're in this society now where trademark has been bastardized by corporations to the point where you can own something for longer than a person can be alive. And that is making derivative art, like the famous Campbell soup painting, wouldn't exist in the new trademark laws. These things couldn't exist. And they're using their money and their weight. They throw it around because the legal system is so weird and corrupt when it comes to trademarks that even if what you're doing is completely legal, if they have enough money, they'll just completely shut you down, and you couldn't fight it even if you were completely within your rights to. It's sort of crazy.
Yeah, and actually, Brian, on that point, there, if the original copyright laws had have remained in place, Star Trek would have fallen into the public domain last year in 2022. So the cage would have been you would have been able to do what you liked, make your own film about that particular Enterprise, Pike, Spock, those characters, and then later the first season, and so on and so on and so on as the years went on. But here we are.
I just wanted to point out too, if you look at the recently announced Emmy nominations for both dramatic and comedy shows, we are living in a tremendous age of writing when it comes to television. The dramatic shows and the comedy shows, there is some wonderful creation happening by some very smart people who are making some really great entertainment across the board. Diverse entertainment, meaning the different kinds of stories being told, all across the gamut, whether they're fantasy stories, whether they're crime stories, whether they're comedy stories about an elementary school. There's so much great writing happening. You would think that Star Trek would be the Tiffany standard of science fiction on TV. And what's so frustrating is we're getting a dumbed down, it's not even family friendly. It's just something that is, I don't know who it's supposed to appeal to. It's definitely lowest common denominator. And I understand there's a lot of Star Trek fans that do like it because it sort of takes the whole pop culture sense memory of what Star Trek has been over the last 57 years and distills it into a confection that I guess goes down easy. But I've always taken, even as a kid, I always took Star Trek very seriously. I learned so many things. I remember as a kid seeing Arena for the first time. And I'll give you an example about why I hate modern Star Trek. Arena was a show that had many different twists and turns in it. When you meet the Gorn, and everybody in pop culture, again, makes fun of the Gorn now. But when you saw the Gorn for the first time, when the Gorn captain is fighting Kirk on this nameless asteroid to the death to save both of their crews, the Gorn captain's using a translator, and the Gorn captain knows he's physically stronger, more imposing. He could take Kirk out very simply. And the Gorn captain says, look, man, I'll be quick and merciful. You're going to die. I have to kill you. But I'll do it quickly and without pain for you. This is what the Gorn captain says, showing the creature has a sense of morality, has a sense of mercy, has a sense of, obviously I admire you, so I will make your death quick and merciful. In Star Trek Strange New Worlds, they've taken the Gorn, turned them into these monstrous creatures that are one part xenomorph and one part slavers. And they've there's a complete lack of understanding. They've taken these characters that were only really shown once in the original series that are shown to be, they have technologically advanced propulsion systems that are faster than the Federation's. They even have a reason why they attacked Cestus 3. Because maybe we had encroached on their space. And in Strange New Worlds, they're like, what can we do to take something that previously existed in Star Trek canon and turn them into stupid black and white adversaries and paint them as the worst possible things of all?
They turned them into the Reavers from Firefly.
It's horrifying. And it shows a fundamental, not just Spock, but a fundamental lack of understanding of what Star Trek is and its very DNA. And that's what's frustrating. When we have all this other great TV in the comedy and drama realms, and we get shitty science fiction. And I wonder, how come nobody is policing that? Why is there not an executive at Paramount going, this is the drivel that you're serving up to us? Shameful. Why are you making such stupid television?
But I think it's the same. Someone was saying this. A friend of mine was saying to me recently about sort of the curse of middle management and how after, a few decades of managing a company, so that the original owners are not involved anymore, obviously. And what you have is the people who have inherited the product, whatever it might be. And in this case, it's Star Trek. And so they're looking for ways to, they're not maybe creative people themselves. And so they're looking for ways to very cheaply and efficiently and quickly give the appearance to shareholders, whatever, that they have innovated somehow, that they have added something of value, and that they have transformed the product into something better, or they've continued its legacy in some way. And here comes these young people with maybe a gender studies degree, and they've come along and they've said, just make it woke, and that appears to be trendy, and that gives the appearance of innovation because you're writing it in a different way. The tone of Star Trek has been modernized. This is the thing I've spoken about recently. It sounds like everybody, just in the reactions of the characters, the expressions on their faces, the way they react, the way they speak, the dialogue is written in this California Valley sort of vernacular, which is so jarring, because if you look at how Star Trek was written, just take the Berman era, for instance, there was a real attempt not to heavily stylize the dialogue. I mean, it's not Shakespeare, but it's been compared to that in the sense that there was an attempt to restrain the dialogue to such a degree that it was not something that you could place, certainly not something that you could place in the 20th or 21st centuries. Right. And so that it would be universal in a way. And that's how it was written. And when aliens spoke, sometimes the aliens could be, very, arch in some cases, they come on the view screen and they speak in that particular way of, I'm going to destroy your ship, Captain. They always had that sort of thing. The makeup might change, but there was an attempt to make them alien. Do you see that episode the other day on Strange New Worlds, which is the one where Kirk, the guy who plays him, I liked his take on Kirk in a sense. I still think he's miscast.
Paul Wesley.
Mm-hmm.
But so he and La'an are on Earth. They're in Canada.
Episode 4, yeah.
Right, and so they meet this spoilers, this Romulan lady who's made to look human. Everything about how she speaks to them, and the words she uses, the tone of her voice, the pitch, the cadence, everything is like she's a millennial.
Yeah, she's like a TikToker, right?
Right.
Yeah,
She
yes.
should sound like an alien.
I expect her to have a food blog or an Instagram blog, yeah.
Right. Or your YouTube channel, whatever,
Right, or her YouTube channel, right.
So
why doesn't she have pointy ears?
Yeah.
She's wearing a beanie, a hat, or whatever. Why don't you just give her pointy ears? Why not just you do that for the fans? Give the Romulan chick pointy ears.
Yeah.
Also, just this stagnation of modern art in general has. I think there's a
Dave,
great. Yeah, go ahead,
Dave. That brings me to a point I want to touch on with Matt Vader. So when I got back from my vacation, I told you that it was so nice not having to watch Star Trek in order to talk about it on these streams, and we made the decision from that point on to maybe forego the reviewing of the episode by episode of season 2 of Strange New Worlds. And I think it's just getting worse where it's like watching Star Trek has become a chore because they have systematically broken down everything that was good about Star Trek and just tossed it out the window. What's your take on this new season of Strange New Worlds? And do you agree that it's just been run into the ground?
It's absolutely been running into the ground. My favorite thing to do is to get home from work and go to bed and watch Strange New Worlds or Secret Invasion or whatever terrible thing is on TV right now. And then I'll sit there and I'll chat with Brian at night while I'm watching it, and then I'll ask him, "What's up with this? Why is this so terrible?" And then we just have kind of a good little time.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, it's fun. But yeah, Star Trek. I was really hopeful for this season because I actually, for the most part, kind of enjoyed season 1. But season 2, I feel like they just kind of dropped the baton. You know what I mean? It just they regressed. They went back to, almost Discovery level incompetence. It's very strange. We have a captain that's not on the show, and when he is on the show, he's hanging out in his kitchen chopping celery. It's odd. I wish I was able to elaborate more, like Rob and Dave are doing down here, because listening to you guys is fascinating. But me, as just an old timey Star Trek guy, I watch this and I don't get it. I don't understand what they're doing. They're absolutely just deconstructing the things that we love, and it's very frustrating. And it's to the point now where I kind of don't care anymore about these shows. I want new stuff. I find myself watching things that like Foundation that I don't know if I'm supposed to like, but at least it's something new and different to me. You know what I mean?
Not if you read the books, though. If you read the books,
right,
it's horrible.
I totally get that. I totally get that. But I'm not a book reader. But at least
envy you.
At least it's more science fiction-y than anything else on TV.
It is science fiction.
And I'm kind of enjoying that. But I watch shows that I should enjoy, like Star Trek or anything made with the Lucasfilm logo attached to it, and I just get mad now. And I'm tired of feeling mad at our entertainment offerings these days. It's very frustrating. So yeah, and I don't miss doing a hour-long review of the show every week. I don't miss it at all. I'll let Brian do that over there on his channel.
Oh my God, I'm having the same problem. Like I'm looking at my live stream. We have a 5-hour live stream every damn Thursday, and half of it is the Strange New Worlds. I'm looking at my podcast numbers just plummet because no one wants to sit there and listen to a Strange New Worlds 2-hour fucking review. So Shay and I were like, let's not do the ups and downs anymore. Let's just do the regular review and we'll do it quicker. Dude, it's not quicker. There's no ups and downs. It's still like an hour and a half.
It's why honestly, it's why I appreciate guys like Robert and Dave, these guys that are like passionate. And Robert, I know Star Trek is in your DNA, man, and you are so passionate about this stuff. And there's people out there like me that just appreciate and love you for that passion. It's amazing listening to you go down your rabbit holes. I'm serious, man. It's just, I wish I had enough the knowledge that you do.
Well,
to be able to explain this Star Trek and what's wrong with it to people.
I think what's hard to get people to understand is I literally grew up with Star Trek. I discovered it as a 5-year-old. Then the animated series came along.
Right.
I watched, then you had the photo novels and the Franz Joseph technical manuals. So Star Trek was always evolving. Then in 79, there was Star Trek the Motion Picture, which, like Dave Cullen, it's my favorite Star Trek movie. It always was my favorite Star Trek movie. And by the way, it feels more like the original series than any other Star Trek movie does. It's just, it only feels like certain kinds of original Star Trek episodes, like Doomsday Machine, Immunity Syndrome, the very serious, more cosmic oriented episodes. And then we had the movies, and then Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. So throughout my life, as I grew up, Star Trek was growing, evolving. Voyager was when for me, it was the first Star Trek misstep, in that it was a copy of a copy of a copy. Whereas they didn't embrace their premise. What happens when you've gone to the new world? Like in Hunt for Red October, when Sean Connery's talking about when Cortez went to the new world, he burned his ships. That way he saw his men were properly motivated, and that's what happened to the Voyager. And the idea they thought it was going to come home was a mistake. It would have been more interesting if they resolved themselves to their fate and said, okay, we're now a Federation beachhead in the Delta Quadrant. How do we build a coalition in a place that has none? And that would have been an interesting, of course, they couldn't do that. They were too afraid. I understand why, but Voyager then started to get lesser, and then Enterprise hit and miss. There's a lot of good stuff in Enterprise when you go back and watch it. But so to me, Star Trek really began its decline with Voyager, even though there's a lot of good in Voyager. But it really started.
Best episode of all time, Threshold.
Oh God,
yeah, Threshold.
But
guys,
I
want to start wrapping up this talk and throw this to Odin. Odin, we have case after case of these studios, Disney, Paramount, Warner Brothers, like basically they're hurting for money. They've overspent. They're not getting the return. Disney has had a series of flops, and they're pulling these austerity measures. How do you think the missteps of these studios financially is going to affect these beloved franchise like Star Trek?
I mean, ultimately, I think we've kind of already seen the impact when it comes to some of the reactions that we've seen either today and also in days past. For instance, when we bring up Star Wars now, the amount of people who just will say simply, I don't care, or I just don't care anymore. It's, I think, gotten to the point where they've created such apathy for these franchises that it really is nothing but a negative for the IP, for of course the fans, because there's nothing worse than apathy, right? If you at least have someone who's happy or even angry or sad or whatever it might be, there's at least an emotion there. But when someone's apathetic and has no emotion to whatsoever, you really can't go much, really can't go anywhere from that, because some people can get so deeply caught in that apathetic mindset where even if you were to provide something somewhat good, right? We've always seen this a little bit with Star Wars, right? I know that, Mr. Kadish, I know that you were a big fan of Andor, right? And, but for me, I watched it and I was like, this is boring. And I just have gotten to the point where I just don't care to even invest the time to find out if it even will become worth the time in the end, right? And so it's really bad for the IPs and all that it's doing. And whether Disney decides to sell off some of these IPs or, whatever they decide to do, it would be much better for them to let someone else give a shot at, get a shot at it versus continuing to do the same thing, because all they're going to do is just continue to turn more and more people off and create more and more apathetic mindsets.
I find it even more frustrating when there's people out there that can make good Star Trek and take these shows that we love and do them properly, like they did with Picard season 3. And I think that's what's so frustrating is we went from that, which everybody loved across the board, to season 2 of Strange New Worlds. It's just, I don't know if that's making it more obvious, the flaws there, or if you know what I'm saying. It's very strange.
Well, if you look at the first 2 seasons of Picard, that was really Akiva Goldsman, right? And then the second season of Strange New World, that's Akiva Goldsman as well. So the Oscar winner Akiva Goldsman is the thread that's connecting all these terrible Star Treks
Oscar
together.
winner Akiva Goldsman.
Yeah.
Well, isn't this really the big issue? I mean, personnel changes have been key, and the reason why season 3 of Picard was as good as it was chiefly because Terry Matalas was primarily in the driver's seat there. And, it's not that we talk about would Paramount sell it on, should they, who would buy it? I was thinking theoretically maybe HBO might be better rather than, please God, it never goes to Disney. But I was thinking, Paramount is more than capable of producing really good product. I mean, it's like, so you've got Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, which I think was maybe a little hard on recently, but it's a good film. And, and Top Gun Maverick. So when the people are there, when the money is there, when you put good storytellers in place, they're more than capable of producing something that people want to see. There's no reason why we can't have the Star Trek franchise reinvigorated, and to the point there about canon and everything that somebody mentioned earlier. I've never agreed with the idea, okay, we're doing this multiverse thing now and everything's in its own universe because that's sort of the popular thing, and that's why we're sort of head canoning our way around why Star Trek is so different to the way it was before. But you cannot reboot Star Trek. When they did this in 2009, I was thinking, no. Star Trek is a chronology. It has dates and times and places and events, and it has a history, and it's set in stone, and you can't alter that. Okay, there's time travel and stuff like that and whatever, but it all still plays within the same core like identity, its look and feel, everything. They've tried very much to keep it consistent for how many 30, 40 years until 2009. When for whatever reason, I don't know whether the 20% different thing came in and they had to bring in this new rule about how the franchise was supposed to look, and the ships change and the uniforms change and all this sort of stuff. The only way I see it improving is if somebody came in there and just said, right, we're going all the way back to Enterprise, and we're just drawing a line, and I said it before, we're gonna say that everything before 2009 is canon. And then you've got Kelvin, and then you've got Prime, which they're trying to convince us that Prime is canon, but it's not. And that's the only way. You just draw these 3 categories. You say this is what Discovery, Strange New Worlds, Picard. This is all Prime. You throw in Prodigy, the other cartoon show. I can't remember what's Lower Decks.
Lower Decks.
Right. Everything else from 1966 to 2005. That's where we're working within. If someone does this, that's the only way I can come back to the franchise with the same. It was because season 3 of Picard feels like a long time ago, and it was the only time since 2005 that I actually felt in love with Star Trek again,
Yep.
albeit very
Me too.
briefly.
I mean, they did sort of do that though. They did
well,
sort of do
I
that.
mean, half-assed it. Like they've never been very
Right.
clear on like what timelines they're using.
Right,
Real
it was
quick,
half-assed, but they did.
I want to give a shout out to Whiskey Jack for his member chat. Top tier discussion, folks. With R&B, sci-fi was supposed to be the smart genre. It's tipping the opposite way these days. And we got a couple super chats we need to get to real quick. Basically, we've got T Stoney for $10. Angel Studios doing great with in-house production. The Chosen Great Show. I think we might have already hit this one.
We did.
Gavin Blackburn. Interesting to see what OTOY could do with Trek. I don't know what OTOY is, but yeah, it'd be interesting.
That's the Roddenberry archive.
Oh, toy.
okay.
Yeah.
OTOY. Yeah, they did that great short with Spock
Mhm.
at the grave site of Kirk. 1864 Kev for $5. Hello, guys. I grew up with Star Trek, and yes, it has changed, but not for the good. Discovery was its death knell. Kind of agree with that. Discovery is miserable. Rec Films Montana for $10. I was doing special edited versions of Strange New World Season 2, taking out annoying stuff like burps, make it go stuff. But it got to a point I could not edit enough. With Movie Picard Season 3, edit I could, but not with Strange New Worlds Season 2. So you can't even re-edit Strange New World Season 2 to be good. That's interesting. Kevin Dorr for $5. If anybody wants to see a movie about the development of the A-bomb, watch Fat Man and Little Boy. Much better insight about the A-bomb than Oppenheimer movie. Interesting. Check that out. 200 Watt Studios for $10. Recent Strange New World episodes had the crew showing Spock how to act Vulcan. You think that would have flown Roddenberry's Trek? What if Sidney Poitier was being taught how to act black?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Dang.
Very hardcore. They have been pretty disrespectful to Spock this
They
season.
call me Mr. Spock.
Mr. Spock.
Hey guys, if you like this podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and comment below on your favorite video as well. That goes a long way with helping us boost our channel and get out there in front of more people. And it lets YouTube know that we're doing something right. And if you want to catch us live, we go live 2 times a week, once on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific time and on Tuesdays at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time. So join us there in the chat. We will see you on the live stream. Stay salty.